All right, I'm going to pray for our time, and we are going to get into the Word. Lord, I pray that as we open your Word and we consider what it means for your people, that we would be thinking about what it means, Lord, that we believe in what you have done, and we put our hope and our trust by faith alone in what you have done. Lord, as we consider, even in this one verse tonight, what it means to have faith, I pray that we would also hear it with fresh ears, as it's something that maybe we become familiar to by name, Lord, but we need to be encouraged in our hearts. And I pray that for those of us here who have never had faith, and those of us here who are struggling with our faith, that we would be refreshed, that we would be made alive through the power of the declaration of what you have done, Lord. I pray these things in your name. Amen. All right, guys, so last week we were in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, and we declared along with Paul that I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God. The gospel is the power of God for salvation for everyone who believes. Right? And we talked about to the Jew first and also to the Greek, to all who believe. And we are continuing along this line in the book of Romans, where Paul has already made his introduction, and this is his thesis statement. This is him saying what this whole letter is going to be about. This claim that he wants to make to the Romans who are already believers, but he wants to remind them and encourage them about faith alone, that we are saved and our hope is in faith alone. Martin Luther. You guys have heard his name before. Maybe some of you guys are thinking of Martin Luther King Jr., who's a civil rights leader from the 60s. But I want you to go back further with me. I want you to think about 1500s Germany. Martin Luther was a young university student. He's a Roman Catholic, and he's a pretty bright individual. But part of that brightness also led him to a very sensitive awareness of his sin. He had a very acute awareness of his sin, and that he fell short of the standards that God had. And while he was a university student, a couple of his close friends died, and this prompted him to become even more aware of the fact that one day he's going to face Christ and he's going to be judged. And so he pulled himself out of the university to join a monastery, to be a monk. And he worked hard at this. He said that he honestly joined the monastery not to study theology, but to save his soul. He worked very hard and said that if ever a monk could obtain heaven by his monkish works, I should certainly have been entitled to it. Right? It kind of reminds me of Paul saying that I'm the Jew of Jews. If anyone was going to be saved by being a Pharisee, it would have been me. And just like Martin Luther said, if anyone's going to be saved by being a monk, it was going to be me. But in all of his studies as a Catholic monk, he just grew in hatred and resentment for God because of how high God's standard of righteousness was. He knew he was supposed to love God, but he couldn't because he was so spurned by the requirements of the law that he felt so condemned that the only way he understood the righteousness of God was a condemnation that he was not there. He was often driven to despair by his own efforts to obey. In all of this, in his life, there was a certain phrase from Scripture that plagued him, and it would frequently come into his mind before he was even saved. And it was the phrase that we're going to be going through in part of our verse today, that the righteous shall live by faith. And he couldn't reconcile what that meant. He couldn't reconcile that the righteous should live by faith, and in his desire to be righteous, he was living in fear. Ultimately, he would be converted, and he would come to understand that the righteousness of God is only made accessible by faith. That he was to exercise that faith, receive that righteousness, and just live by trusting God. And when he understood that the righteousness of God is made accessible to him by faith alone, it started what we refer to as the Reformation. Him and others, because of this phrase, the righteous shall live by faith, started going back to the Scripture and saying what we're doing in the church today is not right. And even our church now joins in the legacy of the Reformation and the things that we believe going back to the Scriptures. Luther said that this phrase, the righteous shall live by faith, was the foundation of all of his doctrine. And we're going to get into why that is. So let's read from Romans 16 and 17. We'll read the verse we went through last week and then the verse we're going through right now. He says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, To the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from heaven, or is revealed from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. So the question is, last week Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for salvation. This week we're seeing how Paul is actually getting into the meat of what that means. What is going on in the gospel that we can declare that it is the power of God to save? This is where Paul is going to back up that claim. So let's look at verse 17. It starts off saying, for in it, speaking of in the gospel. For in the gospel, this is the reason that it is the power of God. The reason is that in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. If you're taking notes, I want you to write down this term, alien righteousness revealed. Alien righteousness revealed. When we talk about the righteousness of God, the reason we refer to Jesus' righteousness and God's righteousness as alien is because it's not from us. The source isn't from us. It's not from the sum of our righteousness. It's an alien righteousness. It's other. It's God's, and it is revealed to us. There's something special about the revealing of righteousness in the gospel, and here's how we know that. Because the revealing of God's righteousness isn't something that even needs to be done to the human being, right? Romans will go on to argue, verses 18 and following, that every person knows by their conscience and by the observation of creation that there's not only that there's a God, but they're actually morally accountable to this God. It says that those who do those things, they know that they deserve condemnation for sin. Look at the very next verse in Romans 1:18. We've already talked about the righteousness of God being revealed, but it says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So the natural state of man already knows that there's a God who is perfect and holy and righteous and just. So what does it mean when we say that the power of the gospel is that the righteousness of God is revealed? It's the way in which it is revealed. It's not revealed just that we know God's righteous. It's revealed that his righteousness is accessible. The reason that the good news is all is because it doesn't just show that there's a righteous God, but there's a God who wants to give you his righteousness. Right? If it was just revealed that God is righteous and he has a standard that you need to live up to, that certainly wouldn't be good news. Right? That's something that we all know, we all are aware of in our hearts. So the idea that the righteousness of God is revealed in faith, meaning that if you believe, the righteousness of God is given to you. The gospel is good news because it answers the most important question, which is how can someone be right before God? This question of how can God look at a sinner and say that they're right and still be just? How could God do that? Because if God overlooks sin, he wouldn't be a just God. But if God, gave us what we deserve, we'd be punished. So how does he not give us what we deserve and still be just? Romans 3, verse 26 says this, that the reason that God looked over former sins and the reason he revealed the truth of righteousness accessible by faith in the way that he did, it says it was to show his righteousness, speaking of God at the present time, so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So God doesn't overlook sin, he deals with it. When he dealt with sin on the cross, it was so that he could be just and punish sin. But he can also be the justifier to say that you are just in his eyes. You are made righteous. This is what we call the theology of imputation. Imputed righteousness from Christ. Christ's righteousness that is his given to you. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, for our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So Jesus takes our sin, we get his righteousness, and that is the power of the good news. So the question is, how do we receive this righteousness? And it is clear, the next line, that it is revealed from faith for faith. And this is an idiom, a Greek idiom meaning faith from beginning to end, right? Starting with faith, ending with faith. The way that you receive the righteousness of Christ is all of faith. Faith alone. Faith alone is one of the cries of the Reformation, of which Martin Luther was a part, that we would be those who cry out faith alone. And I want to talk about some elements of faith. Faith alone. The first element of faith alone is this exact phrase, being that it is beginning and ending with faith. It doesn't start with works and it doesn't end with works. Paul will write to the Galatian church, and they are struggling with this idea of adding all these works and all these ceremonial things in order to be Christians. And Paul basically asked them a rhetorical question. He says, did you receive the Spirit, talking about the Holy Spirit that you receive when you're saved? He said, did you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by hearing with faith? Right, in the Galatian church would be reading this and they'd have to say, of course we received the Spirit by hearing with faith. It wasn't our works. This is the basics of Christianity, right? Then he asks, are you so foolish, having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh? Right, asking them, okay, so you acknowledge that you're not saved by your works. Do you think that you're now being perfected, you're being sanctified by the flesh, or is it the work of the Spirit? Paul is saying it is faith from beginning to end. It is from faith and it is for faith. Faith, not works. Right? This is the most fundamental aspect of Christianity, that we are saved by faith and not by our works, but I want you to hear it anew. I want you to hear it for what it truly means. Listen to these passages. Paul says in Philippians 3:9, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ, the righteousness from God that depends on faith. Galatians 3:11, now it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law, for the righteous shall live by faith. Romans 4:5, and to the one who does not work but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness. So God doesn't evaluate the most religious people to save. He doesn't look for the people who have even worked the hardest. Right? And this is what Luther came to realize. He became a monk in order to save his soul because he thought that's the way I could do the most good works and try to offset my sin. But he was so aware of his sins. He was so aware of the fact that for every one good thing he did, he thought 1,000 evil thoughts. And even the one good thing he did, he couldn't even say that was fully good. There was wickedness in it. Right? God came, Jesus came, and he sat with tax collectors and sinners. He's the friend of tax collectors and sinners. He chose the doubters and the ones who persecute the church and the ones who deny his name. And he chose those who are sinners, and he came to seek and to save the lost. He says that he is the good physician, and he doesn't, physicians are for those who are actually sick. They don't come for the healthy. And he reserves all glory for himself because no one can boast in the foolishness of even you being saved, right? Or even me being saved. No one can boast in what they've done. Ephesians 2:8 says, for by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. So there is no works in the equation of your salvation. It's faith alone, from faith beginning, faith at the end. Another element of this faith alone I want to talk about, and I want to be careful to distinguish, is that faith is not faithfulness. If the good news was presented this way, if I said, hey, good news, you know how there's a God that you are eternally accountable to, and you fall short in every way, and one day everything you do will be brought into account. We're all like, I know that, right? If I said, good news, now you don't have to do perfect works your whole life, you have to have perfect faith. You have to have perfect faithfulness. That is the same thing. But how often do we as believers measure our assurance and our faithfulness to God based on just that, our faithfulness? Faith is not the same thing as faithfulness. Romans 3 asks this question. What if some were unfaithful? Speaking about the people of God in the past, what if some were unfaithful? Well, Paul says, well, does their faithlessness nullify the faithfulness of God? And again, Paul, in this brilliant way, asks this question that we think is so silly. We have to say, of course not. Their faithlessness doesn't make God faithless. So the answer is no, of course not. But to understand this free gift of salvation, this free gift of salvation is free for you. Don't get me wrong. The free gift of salvation is about perfect obedience. It is about perfect obedience. It's just not your perfect obedience. Right? That's the gospel, that the righteousness of Christ and his perfect obedience is imputed to you. That is the power of the gospel. So faith is not perfect faithfulness. And again, this might sound like the same thing, but when we think about faith alone, faith is also not the measure of your faithfulness. We get this wrong all the time as well. I want you to think back, by way of illustration, think back to the Exodus. The Exodus, Moses has gone to Pharaoh and said, let God's people go. Pharaoh says no, plague after plague, miraculous demonstrations from God. And we're at the night of Passover. And God has said to his people, you're going to sacrifice a lamb. You're going to put that blood on the doorpost. And then when the angel of death comes, he's going to kill every firstborn in Egypt unless you have that blood on your doorpost. If there is a Jewish person in that time who says, you know what, I have watched God stick it to Pharaoh. I have watched God display his power. I know the God of my people. I have zero doubt. I'm going to sit with my family in utter confidence that we put the blood on the door so we're okay. And if there's another man who says, I am scared, I don't understand what's going on, I don't know what's going to happen tonight, I don't want to lose my firstborn, but he puts the blood on the door, which man loses his son that night? Neither of them. So it's not the measure of their faith, right? It's the object of their faith. They trusted God enough to put the blood on the door. It doesn't matter how much faith they have. And so we, like the disciples, we say, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. So it's not about a perfect measure of faith, a faith that has zero doubts. It is about the overwhelming power and worthiness of the object of your faith, that being Jesus. If you trust that Jesus is sufficient for your sins, it doesn't matter how much doubt you have. And if you think you have a perfect faith, you don't. So Paul's faith wasn't perfect. Pastor Steve's faith isn't perfect. My faith's not perfect. Your faith is not perfect. But all of us are joined together by a common faith in Jesus and what he's done. And your faith deepens as you get to know Christ and you read more about who he is and you see his heart for sinners and his heart for you, and you actually start to dig deeper into what it means, and you spend a whole life pursuing understanding of what Christ has done, your faith is going to grow and your confidence is going to grow to where you could, along with Paul, can say, I'm not ashamed. And I know in whom I have believed, that I could go to death because I believe in the one whom I've believed. And the final point under faith alone is I want you to understand this as well, that faith does lead to faithfulness. Faith is not faithfulness, but faith does necessarily lead to faithfulness. It's the necessary outflowing of your belief. And here's something you need to understand. If we're going to claim that the very power of God has been declared to us and it has been effected in us, and the righteousness of Christ has been given to us, there is too much power in the gospel for that to fail. That means that if there are no fruits and there are no works in your life and there is nothing, there's no change of heart, there's no change of passions, then who are we to say that the power of God has made an effect in our life? So it is true that faithfulness is the result of faith. But don't look to commit more faithful acts in order to feel as though you have faith. Faith comes first. Look at verse 17 here in Romans again. And this final phrase of this verse is, as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. Right? The righteous will live by faith. This famous line that brought Luther to his knees, brought Luther to repentance, started the Reformation. The righteous will live by faith. This is a quotation from Paul, a quotation of the Old Testament, and we can see kind of that key phrase, as it is written, right? As it was written in the past, and then this quotation. And so if you're taking notes, you can write kind of the history of faith. Right? Paul's going to make an argument for why it was only ever faith that made someone righteous before God. I want you guys to understand this. A lot of people confuse this. The Old Testament does not outline a way for people to be saved by their works. When we talk about the law and we talk about these things in the Old Testament, this was not God's way of making people saved by their works. And Paul makes this argument by showing Abraham himself, the father of the Jewish nation, the father of Israel. Abraham himself was justified by faith. Right? This is the foundation of how God's relationship with man works. The way that you can be just before God is only on the basis of faith. And so Genesis 15, verse 6, this is where it says that Abraham believed the Lord and he counted it to him as righteousness. right? So God looked at Abraham's belief as though Abraham was righteous, right? That is the declaration of the Old Testament. And so here in Romans, we have this quotation from the book of Habakkuk. So if you guys were able to turn there, turn to the book of Habakkuk. If it's on your phone, there's a lot of K's if you're typing it out. There's 3 K's, there's 2 A's, and there's a U, and there's an H. All right? Not in that order. So go to the book of Habakkuk. Paul quotes from this book, and we need to ask the question, whenever we read the New Testament, we tend to breeze past these times where the New Testament quotes the Old Testament. But there's an important question to ask. Okay, if Paul is making the argument that you're saved only ever by faith, there's other places he can quote from the Old Testament, so why Habakkuk? And so we turn to this book and we read it and we study it to find out, what is Paul getting at? He's referencing something that would have been common knowledge. So the book of Habakkuk is very interesting. It starts off with Habakkuk asking God these really hard questions. Asking God, why don't you answer my prayers the way I think you're going to? Why do I see a perversion of justice? Habakkuk's an Israelite, and he's looking around this people that is supposedly the people of God, and there's only ever injustice and there's evil. And God says, Habakkuk, I'm doing something in your day that you wouldn't understand if I told you. You wouldn't even believe me. But he tells Habakkuk, I'm going to send the Chaldeans, another name for the Babylonians, right? I'm going to send this big, evil nation to come punish you guys. But know this, I'm also going to punish Babylon for the way they mistreat you. And so you have to trust me that when I made a promise to you that I was going to save your people, even when they sinned, I'm still going to do that. And so this question arises, well, what are we to do in the meantime? What am I supposed to do if I'm an Israelite living in the time where the majority of Israel is evil, their condemnation is final, and the enemy is coming? And God tells this to Habakkuk. Habakkuk 2, looking at verse 3. This is God saying to Habakkuk, for still the vision awaits its appointed time. Right? What is the vision? What is this promise? This promise to Israel of restoration. He's saying, Habakkuk, it's still coming. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. And then the verse where Paul quotes from. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by faith. And so we see this contrast in verse 4 of God describing the one who is puffed up and who is not right, and the one who puts their faith in God and is right. Right? So what are we supposed to do in the meantime when we know the enemy is coming? You're supposed to trust me. You're not supposed to trust your own works or your own power, but trust me. The righteous live by faith. So until your faith is made sight, until you see what you believe in, you trust me. Now here's something you need to remember about the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk is a Jew living in the land of Israel, and so he thinks a little differently than we do in the church. So God made a promise to Israel. Israel, if you obey me, your crops will flourish, your herds will flourish, you will not have sickness like the other nations will have no dominion over you. But if you disobey me, the opposite is true. Your crops are going to fail. I won't send rain. Your kings are going to fail. You're going to have enemy nations are going to have dominion over you. And so what happens is Habakkuk is looking around and all he's seeing is the curses. He's seeing that his people disobeyed. They basically failed to honor God in every way that they could. And so with all these conditional promises that God had made to Israel, if you fail, I'm going to curse you, I'm going to curse you, I'm going to curse you. God reminds Habakkuk that, Habakkuk, I made unconditional promises to you guys. That no matter how many times you fail, there will be a day when I give you a new heart and I actually restore all of you guys. I'm going to give you a new heart. And so until that day comes, until that restoration comes, know that even when the enemy comes, I'm going to judge them and I'm going to restore you. Believe that. Have faith in me. And so by the end of this short little book of Habakkuk, in Habakkuk 3, Habakkuk makes a confession to God of his belief in spite of the fact that it seems like everything is falling apart. So look at Habakkuk 3, verse 13. This is awesome. This is epic. If you were in our Jesus Is series a while back, you might recognize some of the language here. So God gives Habakkuk this promise of redemption, and he gives it in a prophecy where Habakkuk gets to see into the future what God's going to do. He says, you went out for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked, laying him bare from thigh to neck. So Habakkuk says, God, you went out and you crushed Satan, and you were there for your anointed one, your Messiah. Right, that's the word. He's saying, God, you're going to do it. You're going to keep all your promises. And then look at verse 16. Habakkuk 3, verse 16. This is his confession. He says, I'm scared. He says, I hear and my body trembles. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters into my bones. My legs tremble beneath me. Yet I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon those who invade us. So what Habakkuk is saying is, God, I hear the enemy coming. I can hear their marching. I'm terrified, but you promise that you're going to deal with them, so I'm going to wait for that day. And this is Habakkuk looking around and seeing all the curses of the law. He says, though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit beyond the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Even though all of that is true, yet I will rejoice in Yahweh. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Yahweh, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on the high places. So Habakkuk becomes this crucial book that illustrates what faith looks like, right? Because Habakkuk's living in a time where he's not going to see the fruition of any of this. He's not going to see God defeat Babylon. He'll be long gone, but he has faith in the promises of God. This is the nature of faith. So from Abraham, justified by faith. Habakkuk reiterates that the just live by faith. Paul, to you, the message is believe, and it will be counted to you as righteousness. The nature of faith is trusting when you don't know. Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And there's a lot that we can't see. We don't know what God's going to do in our life. We can't see what God's going to do with our country. We can't see what God's going to do with this church. We can't see where God's going to put us in our life. We can't see when Christ comes back. We haven't experienced what it means to live without sin, to be raised incorruptible. We haven't been glorified. We haven't seen the risen Lord. We haven't been perfected. We haven't had all of our questions answered. But what God would probably tell to us is, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. Just like Habakkuk, trust me. So we trust him, and we don't take all these things into our own hands. We lean on him, and we put our faith in him. So faith is the only means, faith alone is the only means by which we are brought into the power of God, the good news of the perfect death and resurrection of his Son. A righteousness that is not our own. It's an alien righteousness given to us. Right? This is why Paul can say that this message is the power of God. Faith alone. Faith alone, not works, not faithfulness, not the measure of your faith, not a perfect faith, but a well-placed faith in Jesus, no matter how imperfect it is. Right? This is the good news. We can have faith and have hope and have confidence, and we can live by that faith, and you ought to trust God and never stop preaching to yourself, preaching to your own soul, that you're forgiven on the basis of a perfect work already accomplished. Never forget, never take it for granted. Direct your affection to the object of your faith. Get to know the object of your faith. Jesus Christ. He lived for your righteousness. He died for your justification. He raised for your salvation. He lives for your sanctification. He shares in his own glorification. He lives now to intercede between you and God always. He advocates for you when you sin. He helps you by his Spirit. He speaks of you to his Father. His angels look on in wonder. He calls you a friend. He calls you a co-heir with him. He loves you more than you're capable of experiencing. He will come to your aid. He measures every trial that he allows in your life, and he stands by you in every one of them. He prepares you for the days to come. He doesn't let you go. He won't let you go. He cheers your obedience and rejoices with your growth. He took the penalty for your disobedience and looks at you as though you had never sinned. He delights to forgive you. He thought of you on the cross. He thought of you in his prayers to the Father. He rejoices to see you. He prepares a place for you, and he'll welcome you with open arms. He'll wipe away every tear. He'll share in his throne, and he sees you only ever through the gift of his own righteousness. He's ready to enjoy fellowship with you forever, and he's more delighted in you than you are in yourself. He also says that today is the day of salvation. All of this is true of you only by faith alone, in Christ alone. The power of God for those who believe. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved. I want to close tonight reading again from Romans chapter 3. Romans 3 starting in verse 21. But now the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. Although the law and the prophets bear witness to it, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ, for all who believe. For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God and are justified by his grace as a gift, through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as a propitiation by his blood, to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance he had passed over former sins. It was to show his righteousness at the present time, so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Lord, I thank you that we have a righteousness not our own. That when we're tempted to hear the voice of the accuser, Lord, to know that Satan often gets the first word, but to know that your Son had the final word. That if we are putting our faith in you, that we believe in what you've done, we are saved on the basis of what you did on our behalf, not on the basis of what we do even now. Lord, I pray that each and every soul here would consider what it means to believe. That they would let go of the temptation to want to be self-justified. Lord, the temptation to think that we are beyond salvation, that we are beyond forgiveness. And what a spite that is to what you've accomplished on our behalf. Lord, teach us to consider you, to look at Christ in each and every moment of our life. We pray these things in your name. Amen. All right, you guys are dismissed to small group time.